ever feel the need to just turn off the world for a while? To get out of the house? To get out on your motorcycle and to find yourself out on a lonely road so that you can just ride? You ever have that feeling, that urge? I'm convinced that sometimes a ride like that can transform itself into a chance encounter where your presence on your bike was absolutely essential. Like the stars were aligned for something special, something meaningful to happen to you out there on that road. Maybe it's like a calling for a mission that needs to be fulfilled by you. Yeah, it can happen because it happened to me, and I'd like to share that with you. Thank you very much for joining me today. Recorded in beautiful Loveland, Colorado. Welcome to Peace Love Moto, the podcast for motorcyclists seeking that peaceful, easy feeling as we cruise through this life together. Are you ready? Let's go! It was a Sunday morning, and I just didn't feel like going to church. I don't know why. My wife and I have loved attending our small little church in our hometown of Loveland, Colorado. That's where we see many of our closest friends on Sundays. It's where we sing and feel a very strong sense of belonging. It's a little church where people will ask how you're doing and genuinely want to know. I like that. But this particular Sunday morning, I didn't want to go. I wanted to go out on my motorcycle. I wanted to ride somewhere. Anywhere. Yeah, I get like that sometimes. Maybe you do too. My wife, God bless her, knows my quirks. She said, "I'll go on to church and I'll see you later." And as always, she asked, "Where are you going to go?" And this time I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Okay, be careful." Yeah, after 40 years together, she knows me, and I love her so much. Yeah, there was a feeling of guilt, for sure. Missing a Sunday morning at church sometimes meant not seeing some of our closest friends for another week. Karen would see them and talk and tell them where I am, or where she thinks I am. Missing an opportunity to welcome first-time visitors, that's a big deal for me. I like to talk to strangers, as you might guess, and I always ask, "Hey, what do you do for fun?" Always hoping that someone will say, "Oh, I ride a motorcycle." I'm like a one-man welcoming committee. But not this Sunday. I just wanted to ride. I needed to ride. The urge was strong to get out of town, onto the road, out into the wind. I don't know why. I left home going north, climbed the road that ascends over Horsetooth Reservoir. Strange name, I know. But when you see its namesake rock formation, you'll say, "Yep, that looks like the teeth of a horse." The reservoir is deep and long and beautiful. Steep canyon walls on all sides surrounded by clear, clean, very cold water. Waters whose source is snowmelt from the high Rocky Mountains just to the west and the Continental Divide. This road is spectacular. I connected onto Highway 287 just north of Fort Collins, and I headed north. I have ridden this stretch of roads hundreds of times. It's my go-to place if I'm not in the mood necessarily for twisty, deep river canyon roads that require my full attention. Out here on these roads that are relatively straight, it's like flying. Very little traffic on a road that slowly bends, that lets you cruise comfortably at 70 or 75 miles an hour. On my bike, this is where I changed my setup from dynamic mode to road mode. A very soft suspension setup, amazingly smooth. And the boxer engine, I believe, is very, very happy in 6th gear at about 75 miles an hour out there. It hums, and to me it sounds like an airplane engine. And not a jet engine, but a propeller engine. I do feel like I'm flying. Rock formations also in this area resemble Monument Valley out in southern Utah. When my son's mother and father-in-law come to visit from the hills of New Hampshire, this road is their go-to place. They love to drive this road because they're not used to long stretches. Clearly, mostly straight, surrounded by distant mountains. It's just the definition of peace. You can set the cruise control and completely relax. So with my wife and my friends at the church service, I rode alone. Cruise control set, just taking in what's in front of me and my bike. Just taking it in. I stopped as usual at the Forks. Only about 30 miles from my home, it's a really different state of mind out here. It's a very historic building, originally a stage stop for pioneers going west. It was along a path called the Overland Trail. Today, it still has a large porch out there that I love, and an old-fashioned grocery store on the main level, and upstairs there's a nice restaurant serving homemade meals. But it's that porch that I'm most attracted to, especially on a warm, sunny day. Already full of coffee from home, I skipped getting my vanilla latte from Jeanette, who works as a cashier and a barista, but instead I grabbed an unhealthy but really tasty Coca-Cola and a Zero candy bar. I jokingly say, hey, this is health food in some countries. It's good stuff. I took them both out to the porch, sipped and ate while the day warmed up even more, all the while waiting for some stranger to step out on the porch and ask me about my bike or where I'm going or where I'm coming from. None did. I checked my phone, no calls, no texts. Karen, my wife, would still be in church with her friends. Well, somewhat satisfied with the idea that I'm not needed today, I got back on my bike and I rejoined Highway 287, accelerating pretty quickly to 75 miles an hour. Raw horsepower on that bike. I love it. Turned on the cruise control and just chilled. All was well with the world. On the verge of the all-elusive peace of mind, but for some reason, not quite there. Almost a feeling of loneliness, which for me is weird out on my bike. Don't normally feel that way. A car with the hood up was just ahead. I slowed a little, edged my bike more to the left toward the center line of the highway. If there was a person in the car, I wanted to give them enough room. In a fraction of a second that it took to pass the car, I saw a figure standing in front of that open hood. Someone looking at the engine while holding a phone, it looked like. Being Mr. Conversation with strangers, and maybe Mr. Helpful to a fault, I checked my mirrors and hit the brakes, did a U-turn, and came up behind the stranded car. Her car, as it turned out. Turning on my warning flashers on my bike, I pulled off my helmet and walked to the front of the car where a 20-something-year-old young lady set her phone down and said hi. And I could tell she had been crying. She apologized for the tears, saying she felt a bit stranded. She said that her car engine started losing power as she was climbing this hill that we were on. This spot here in Colorado is where it crests to begin its descent into Wyoming, but it's a bit of a steep, long climb. She said it would run, but she said she couldn't keep up with highway speeds and was just kind of chugging, kind of losing power. So I thought I'd take a look, and I asked her to go ahead and start the motor. It started right up, and there was nothing obvious to me anyway. She said that it sounded much smoother now, and than it did just a few minutes before. She went on to say that I was actually the second person to stop. Minutes before, she said a guy in a pickup truck stopped, and she pretended to be talking to somebody on her phone and told that guy that she was fine, that help was on its way. So he left. She told me that was a lie. She didn't have anyone on the phone because there's no cell phone service here. I knew that. But she said, then you rode up on a motorcycle instead of being in a car, and for some reason I felt safe. Wow, that was nice to hear. That was really nice. She said that she had come from Fort Collins on her way to work as a waitress in Laramie, Wyoming, some 40 miles ahead. Honestly, there's not much between Fort Collins and Laramie. You can find gasoline and a very awesome latte and the basics back at the Forks, but north of there, nada, not much. No gas stations, nothing but open road until you reach Laramie. It's beautiful, but there's nothing out there as far as services go. She said that rather than trying to make it onto Laramie, she preferred to go back to the Forks if she could get there. Good cell phone service there, and that's where her family could probably easily meet up with her and try to figure out what's going on with the car. So I suggested let's give the car another try. If it keeps running, we'll turn around and head back to the Forks. I said that I would follow her on my bike with my flashers on and suggested kind of staying toward the right-hand side of the road just in case. She thought that was a good idea, so off we went. No apparent issues with the engine, from what I could tell, riding behind her. She was cruising right along, just a little bit under the speed limit, and we reached the Forks again in about 15 minutes. We agreed that even though her car was appearing to run fine, it's probably a good idea to not go ahead and drive on to Fort Collins, but rather just be there. She told me that while she was driving and got back into cell phone service, she was actually able to reach her mom, and she said her mom and a mechanic friend were on their way to meet us at the Forks. Well, now that I was back at the Forks, and Jeanette, the barista, said, "Ron, you're back." I offered to buy a fancy coffee while we waited, and she said sure, and we both opted for a latte. Being my drink of choice, I got one for both of us, and I was going to give her some space. I said, hey, I'll give you this area over here. I'll go sit by myself and maybe make a call or so around the corner so that you'll have your own space. But she said, no, I want to talk with you. Wow, that was a nice surprise. You know, it's amazing how that conversation went. It was so natural. Strangers no more. She shared how she was going to school part-time at the university there in Laramie and usually stayed other days when she wasn't working or in school with her mom in Fort Collins. It's amazing to me how that conversation between two strangers developed and where that conversation went next. She also shared how she struggled with depression sometimes, and today had been an extra rough day, and then when the car broke down, well, that made just everything kind of go bad. I felt that it was a good time to tell her about my morning. How I didn't want to go to church that day, but rather I just wanted to go for a ride, a chance to be alone, or a chance to talk with a stranger, whichever or whenever, but I wanted to be out on my bike that morning. I told her about my wife, who understood that sometimes I just needed to go for a ride to right things in the world, in my head maybe. She said that she was very glad that God brought us together, that God brought me to her rescue that day. I said that it was not so much as a rescue, but rather maybe a couple of strangers who just needed a conversation. Moments later, she looked across the parking lot and said, "There's my mom." As she drove up, a lady, maybe in her mid-40s, walked straight up to me and said, "You must be Ron." And before I could say anything, she grabbed me and gave me a hug. That was wonderful. That girl had been talking with her mom and told her about me, I guess, that I was safe and I was willing to help her. And her mom thanked me for stopping to check on her daughter. I told her that I had a daughter too, and I know she would do it for me. But most importantly, I so enjoyed the conversation that we just had. Maybe I was at the right place at the right time. So a couple of weeks later, on a Sunday following the church service, I told the pastor of our church, Scott, about that experience, how I didn't feel like going to church that morning, and how maybe God put me in a different place that Sunday morning for a reason. Scott's very wise. Scott said that he'd had the same experiences, even as a pastor sometimes. He said he didn't always feel like going to church, but rather he needed to be out alone somewhere because maybe God would open a door. Maybe God had another plan. And I guess that's the right word. A plan. Someone's plan. I was given a motorcycle as a child, and it has given me confidence and self-reliance. Riding certainly has given me more joy than I can even describe. But maybe there are chance encounters, though, that are really, really important. Like that young lady said, she trusted me because I approached her on a motorcycle. She felt that I was safe. I am so grateful for being approachable on a motorcycle. Aren't you? It's my nature to want to be helpful when I'm out for a ride, and maybe it's your nature too. If you really feel like you need to go for a ride next time, just got this urge to go, maybe you really should. Someone may be waiting for you. As always, thank you so much for listening. I wish you peace, and I wish you love.